Hello, class, and welcome to week 9 NUR 410 Nursing Research Reading, Using, and Creating Evidence. I am your professor, Dr. Marion Johnson. I hope everybody's had a fantastic time so far. A little difficult at times, but everybody's been very successful. Thank you for reaching out in your time of need. Continue to do so. Text me, call me, email, whatever way you feel like. So let's get started with an introduction to qualitative analysis. A qualitative analyst is much like the leader of a jazz band. Although he or she may not start out with a general idea of what is to be accomplished, the band leader follows each musician, as he or she improvises on the basic theme. The music is not exactly composed, but rather emerges. Much the same can be said about qualitative analysis. The final product of the analysis emerges as the researcher follows the informants as they illustrate the question more and more, as they illuminate the question more and more. Jazz compositions are often longer than traditional compositions. Chasing interpretations of themes takes time and effort, so a lot of music is generated. Likewise, qualitative study results in volumes of information. The thick description and prolonged engagement that produce credible, trustworthy results also generate a tremendous number of words. The sheer volume of data that is characteristic of qualitative inquiry creates challenges in both data management and drawing sensible conclusions. The factor explains why qualitative data analysis is sometimes referred to as data reduction. The goal is to reduce the data to meaningful units that can be described, interpreted, and reported in an understandable way. The analysis of numerical quantitative data is relatively straightforward. The correct statistical test is selected and applied, and results are interpreted. Qualitative analysis, in contrast, requires a different skill set, even a different state of mind, and the methods that are used are not standard, even with a single tradition. The intent of data analysis, regardless of the approach, is to organize, provide structure, and draw out meaning from the data collected. In performing such analysis, the qualitative researcher faces three types of challenges. First, qualitative analysis offers no single standard for the analytic process. On its surface, this absence might seem to simplify analysis, but in execution, the lack of clearly defined steps often results in false starts, backtracking, and an enormous use of time. Even with traditions, recommendations may vary widely as to the appropriate steps to take. Some authors argue that simply having steps means that preconceptions exist, whereas the avoidance of a systematic process enables creative and insightful conclusions. Regardless, the qualitative researcher faces a perplexing array of possibilities for approaching the analytic process. The work of the qualitative researcher is further complicated by a second characteristic of qualitative inquiry: the enormous quantity of data that must be thoughtfully reviewed, reflected on, and summarized. The researcher must make sense of pages and pages of narratives, observations, and transcripts to carry out the analysis process. Managing these reams of data Tracking the source and type of each piece, triangulating findings, and locating supportive quotations are all complex due to the sheer quantity of material that must be reviewed. The last challenge centers on the need to reduce or put the data in a manageable format for dissemination of the findings. For the richness of the data to be maintained, the researcher must be thorough and use the words of informants, yet reporting and publication restrictions necessitate development of a concise report. Balancing rich description with focus presents a challenge for every qualitative researcher. Qualitative analysis is a difficult and complex when done well, mainly because of these challenges. It requires patience, persistence, and a good deal of discipline. Nevertheless, the effort may bring rich rewards. Soundly drawn qualitative conclusions enhance the evidence for a holistic view of nursing practice. Ensuring the findings are trustworthy is the job of the qualitative analyst. Characteristics of a qualitative analyst. Qualitative analysis may not be standard, but it does have some steps that are common to all approaches. All qualitative researchers must prepare the data for analysis, conduct the analysis by developing an in-depth understanding of the data, represent the data in reduced form, interpret the larger meaning of the data. These may look like sequential steps, but the delineation between them is often virtually undetectable because the researcher moves back and forth among data collection, analysis, and drawn conclusions. Unlike quantitative studies, when analysis is postponed until all data have been collected, qualitative analysis begins nearly as soon as data collection has begun. As data are collected, they are reviewed and re-reviewed, and analytic memos are written. Newly collected data are compared to existing data to confirm or refute conclusions and to decide when saturation has been reached. This constant comparison of new findings to existing results is a characteristic of qualitative analysis. It is sometimes called intensive engagement with the data to reflect the depth at which the analyst considers the meaning of the information collected. This approach enables the researcher to pursue interesting ideas or to sort through confusing input while informants are still able and data collection is still in progress. The researcher is free to follow where the informants lead instead of taking predetermined path leading to a single conclusion. Using a constant comparison process allows the analysis to guide subsequent data collection by amending or adding interview questions or changing observational methods. The researcher may recruit new informants or change selection criteria to eliminate issues raised during analysis. This highly flexible process, which is essential for the grounded theory approach, is called theoretical sampling. Theoretical sampling involves the selection of a second sample of informants with less restrictive criteria to encourage diverse viewpoints to emerge. These secondary sites or cases are purposely selected to compare with the sample that has already been studied. Although this may sound like a sampling issue, theoretical sampling is, in effect, a source of triangulation, one of the means by which qualitative analysis confirm their results. It is characteristic of qualitative inquiry that data collection and analysis, even sampling and measurement strategies, may be, indis- may be indistinguishable during the process. Data collection and data analysis are symbiotic in that the researcher must go back and forth between the two to identify the point at which results are trustworthy and data saturation occurs. Oh, my arm hurts already. Well, I guess I wasn't on pause. Okay, well, that was students texting in. Styles of qualitative analysis. Qualitative researchers use multiple methods of analysis. Some influential qualitative methodologists have suggested general directions for the approach to overall analysis. Generally, three major analytic styles are distinguished that fall on the continuum between structure and lack of structure. Template analysis style, Editon analysis style, and immersion crystallization style. At one extreme is a style that provides a sorry, that light. At one extreme, there's a style that provides a highly systematic and standardized approach to analysis, while at the other end is a more intuitive, subjective, and interpretive style. Neither style is right or wrong for a particular study. The selection of an approach and process depends on the research question, the study design, and the sensibilities of the researcher. The most highly structured style is the template analysis style, which requires developing a template that provides an analysis guide for sorting narrative data. This style is appropriate when a study has a clear theoretical perspective because it requires using codes that are devised as a priori. These codes may be developed theoretically or they may be based on established literature. The advantage of template analysis is its simplicity. It is focused and structured approach to analysis. It is more time efficient than other analytic styles, and it is common approach in content analysis. The use of code books, interreliability assessment, and data definitions are characteristics of this approach, and it is widely used in nursing research. The Editon analysis style is geared towards interpretation of text to find meaningful segments. Researchers using grounded theory, phenomenology, or hermeneutic traditions employ this approach. This approach is commonly encountered in nursing research and is used to discover the meaning of experiences, relationships, and interactions. The least structured approach is the immersion crystallization analysis style. It is appropriate when a researcher desires total immersion in and reflection on text. Total immersion to immersion in and reflection on text, especially during case research and ethnography. Stemming from the notion that the researcher is the true analytic tool, this analytic approach requires that the investigator be immersed in the data and rely heavily on intuition to arrive at conclusions. Insights do not necessarily come after the data have been collected, but must arise during data collection as well. So the analytic technique also employs constant comparison. As the analysis is being carried out and the conclusions are crystallizing, the researcher can better decide how to proceed in further data collection. Immersion crystallization analysis is not a style that appears in the nursing research literature as much as the other two styles, but it is still useful in healthcare research. Its primary downsides are its time-consuming nature and requirement that the researcher constantly holds his or her biases at bay. Perrier water tonight. These three qualitative analysis styles may be employed in a variety of ways. Each has specific characteristics that apply to a particular type of research question and analysis procedure. But all qualitative analysis will not use the same single process. Primary considerations described in this chapter are generally applicable to qualitative analysis, but a single study may include all of these steps or only a few of them. The qualitative analysis process. Qualitative analysis is an active and interactive process. The researcher looks at the data deliberately and in depth to become thoroughly familiar with them. It is not unusual for the researcher to examine and re-examine the data multiple times in the search for the meaning. This investigative process requires integrating multiple ways of knowing to get at the heart of the data. Fitting the data together is similar to putting the pieces of the puzzle together. The researcher becomes embedded in the data, like a detective at a crime scene, looking for clues that might lead to an intuitive conclusion about the data. As the researcher progresses through the process of conjecture and verification, corrections and modifications are made, leading to the development of pattern and themes. Qualitative analysis may be viewed as a cognitive process that evolves through the following phases. Comprehension occurs early in the process of analysis. The researcher attempts to make sense of the data that has been collected and get a sense of the overall tone. Synthesizing leads the researcher to sift through the data using inductive reasoning to put the pieces of the puzzle together. Theorizing brings the researcher to the point of what he or she believes has truly emerged from the data. This phase continues until the best and most parsimonious explanation has been evolved. A parsimonious explanation is one that is the most focused while providing the best overview of the final conclusions. Recontextualizing is a process that involves applying the theory that was derived from the analysis to different settings or groups. This extended exploration can result in an increased generalizability of the newly developed theory. The premise is that if a theory can be recontextualized, it can be generalized. Even though these phases are presented here in a linear fashion, they are rarely accomplished in that way. Instead, these phases typically intertwine with one another and may occur sequentially or simultaneously. Management and organization of data. To make sense of the narrative data, a method of managing and organizing the information must be established early in the research process. The analysis process can proceed in a logical, if not linear, fashion. Organization and preparation of the data include transcription of audio recordings, optical scanning of artifacts and other documents, addition of field notes to transcripts, and other preparatory activities. It is imperative to effectively organize data so they can be thoroughly evaluated and their confidentiality can be preserved. Data that are not well controlled are at the risk for misuse and unauthorized access. Given this risk, data management is a primary consideration of the qualitative researcher. Each piece of information that has been collected should be cataloged in some fashion. For each piece of data, the source, data of collection, and type of data should be noted. Because qualitative inquiry often generates multiple types of data, the same study may include electronic transcripts, hard copy notes, photography, and audio recordings. Finding a method to track and maintain all of these data can pose quite a challenge. The data management process should be determined early in the study so that data can be cataloged, reviewed, and analyzed as they are collected. Review the data for initial impressions. Once the data has been sorted and cataloged, the researcher undertakes the first of many reviews of the data. The data will be examined in their entirety many times, but the first read through is helpful for establishing an overall impression of the data. It is recommended that the first reading be just that, a reading, rather than a review or note-taking session. Performing this initial review without preconceptions can give the researcher a sense of the data and some time to reflect on their meaning. The researcher should finish the initial review with general ideas about the tone of the data, impressions of the depth and clarity with which informants presented their ideas, and thoughts about where the research should go next. Identify a classification system. After a general impression has been gained from the read through of the data, the researcher must develop a classification system. The researcher must establish as a schematic to increase the manageability of the data. A schematic is an outline of the categories of meaning that may be expected from the data. Excuse me. In the template approach, the schematic is predetermined. In other approaches, it will be likely a work in progress. Schematic, a system of organizing data into preset categories to allow for examination and further analysis. The development of a schematic as a classification system requires either substantial theoretical and literature background or an intense examination of the data. The development of general categories requires that the analysts elicit underlying consistencies, concepts, and clusters of concepts. This intense examination raises many questions. What is this informant saying? What is going on? What does it mean? What is this similar to? What is it different from? Develop codes and a code book. After completing an intense examination of the data and developing an overall schematic, the researcher develops more specific categories of meaning based on what has been gathered. These categories of meaning are called codes. Codes support a more detailed analysis process for the data. They are chunks of meaning or pieces of data that demonstrate patterns or themes in the responses. Codes. Labels, descriptions, or definitions assigned to data to allow them to be categorized and analyzed in qualitative research. An infinite range of possible codes exist for qualitative data. Nevertheless, the qualitative analysis can reflect on the following general categories of meaning to guide the code development process. Setting and context codes. Identify elements of the setting or the environment that form patterns. Perspective codes. relate the unique viewpoint of informants in relation to the topic under study. Subjects, ways of thinking. Describe how informants frame thoughts and actions about the topic. Process codes. Outline the ways things get accomplished. Activity codes. Describe things informatics or others do. Strategy codes. Relate the strategies informants use to accomplish goals. Relationship codes. Identify the ways individuals interact and relate to one another. Social structure codes. Describe the ways individuals interact in groups. Code the data. After a code book has been developed, the analyst then codes the existing data by classifying each unit of analysis into a coded category. This requires that the researcher determine the unit of analysis within each piece of data. The unit of analysis is the most basic segment or element of the raw data or information that can be assessed in a meaningful way regarding the phenomena. A unit of analysis might comprise a word, a phrase, or artifact, a photograph, or descriptive paragraph. The researcher reviews the data again, this time identifying and labeling each unit of analysis. The unit of analysis are then reread and categorized into the appropriate code. An example of a coded excerpt appears in by reviewing the transcript. The reader can see how phrases are coded into categories or meaning in the code book. Each identified unit of analysis is assigned to a specific code or placed in a leftover category. These leftovers may emerge as individual codes, or they may be isolated responses that are later ignored. Qualitative analysis is rarely about single instances of occurrences, but rather looks for overall patterns and themes in the data. Codes that have a large number of entries are likely the basis for emerging themes. Codes with a very few entries should be scrutinized to assess whether they represent common meanings or isolated anecdotes. During the coding process, it is not unusual to require modifications to the code labels, definitions, or keywords as new data are constantly compared and analyzed in relation to existing data. Evaluate the codes to identify overall themes. The coding process is used both to generate descriptions and to begin interpretation of themes and patterns in the data. Using codes for description involves a detailed rendering of information common to the people, places, or events in the research setting. Descriptive codes are particularly useful in case studies and ethnography. Identifying themes requires in-depth scrutiny of the codes and the data. As a result of this scrutiny, themes emerge that encompass several codes. A qualitative study may have a substantial number of codes. It is not uncommon for researchers to report anywhere from 10 to 60 codes for an analysis, but only a small number of themes should emerge. Often an analysis will arrive at one central theme with a small number of sub-themes based on several dozen codes. Themes are, as the words implies, overall patterns that are recognized in the data through categorization and analysis of individual units of meaning. These common threads appear frequently in the analysis, and they should be fairly self-evident by the end of the laborious analysis process. Themes are not single anecdotes, but rather reoccurring meanings that appear woven throughout all the data that are collected. It is through identification of these overall themes that qualitative analysis makes its greatest contribution to the evidence of nursing practice. Software of qualitative analysis. As noticed previously, the analysis process coding segment of data into meaningful categories and developing overarching themes. This coding process is based on units of analysis that may consist of entire paragraphs of information, so it can be laborious from a practical standpoint. Although this process is often done manually, it may also be computerized. Computer software for qualitative analysis is less widely available than quantitative analysis software. Often researchers have no choice except to resort to manual data management. Indeed, they follow this path nearly 65% of the time, according to one study. Although it can be cumbersome, time-consuming, undertaking, many qualitative researchers prefer manual analysis because they believe it enables them to remain immersed in the data. Use of computer-based qualitative analysis continues to inspire controversy among qualitative researchers. Some perceive a process otherwise viewed as holistic, interpretive, and humanistic becomes mechanical when it is automated. Others voice concerns that the efficiencies of automation will tempt qualitative researchers to use larger samples and sacrifice depth for breadth. Others believe that using a computer for qualitative analysis makes the process quicker and easier without losing touch with the data. Computerized analysis may make coding less burdensome, freeing the researcher to find creative ways of looking at the data. The computer offers assistance in processing, storing, retrieving, cataloging, and sorting through data, so it leaves the researcher with more time for review and reflection on meaning. Such software allows the transcribed data to be entered and coded based on a dictionary of codes that has been developed by the researcher in an identical manner to one that is manually based. Qualitative analysis software provides some very real advantages. Multiple copies of data can be made, so the researcher is not tied to a paper system. Blocks of data can be sorted and moved to other codes, and the ease of assigning data to codes may enable the researcher to try several coding schemes before settling on a single one. The capacity to organize the same data into multiple codes may also help the researcher see patterns that would not emerge when all units of analysis had one exclusive code assigned. During this process, automation allows the researcher to maintain the original data in its intact form so it can be reread in its context rather than its individual units of analysis. Most computerized systems also have a search capacity such that they can identify specific words or phrases that support the coding process. Using these systems can enhance reliability by applying standard rules that are built into programs. The use of the qualitative analysis software is likely to remain the subject of controversy for some time due to interpretive nature or qualitative inquiry. It is clear, however, that such software can help the researcher be more efficient in data analysis while leaving the interpretation to the researcher. Software can sort, document, and copy, but it cannot yet perform reflection, analysis, and interpretation. Those elements require the human component, that is, a skilled researcher who can reduce a large amount of data to a manageable, meaningful form. Reliability and validity, the qualitative version. Quantitative researchers are concerned with reliability and validity because the generalization of cause and effect findings to population requires a certain level of evidence based on statistical significance. Applying quantitative standards for reliability and validity to qualitative studies often results in frustration for researchers and a shortage of studies used as evidence for nurses. The qualitative researcher should not focus on quantitatively defined indicators of reliability and validity, but that does not mean that rigorous standards are not appropriate for evaluating findings. Guba and Lincoln, 1989, established the classic standards for qualitative research, which call for an overriding emphasis on trustworthiness or the true value of the data that have been collected. These authors recommend that researchers use 4 criteria to establish the trustworthiness of qualitative conclusions: credibility, dependability, confirmability, and transferability. These criteria may already be familiar to the reader because they also apply to design decisions. The discussion here will focus primarily on how trustworthiness is instilled during the analysis process. The qualitative researcher has several means of ensuring each criterion is evident in a final study. Credibility of results. Qualitative researchers are concerned with the credibility of the study results. How confident is the researcher that his or her interpretations represent truth? Several techniques can be used to ensure that credibility exists. First, a prolonged engagement with the participants involved in the study supports in-depth analysis. Second, triangulation is useful to enhance the credibility of the researcher's conclusions. Third, external checks performed on the analysis may establish credibility. One type of check is peer debriefing. Peer debriefing involves reviewing methods, procedures, and conclusions with objective peers who have expertise in the study methods or content. Dependability of analysis. If the data is not dependable, then the credibility of the qualitative analysis will suffer. In contrast, the dependability of the analysis is supported when multiple raters are able to achieve similar results when applying the codebook to identified units of analysis. Inter-rater reliability or intercoder reliability is used by qualitative researchers to ensure dependability of the data. Measures of inter-rater reliability quantify the amount of agreement between 2 coders who use the same codebook to categorize units of analysis. 2 methods are available to assess qualitative agreements. Simple agreement is the percentage of time that both coders agreed on a categorization. Cohen's kappa takes this analysis one step further and generates a p-value for the probability that random error was responsible for the agreement. Agreement of at least 80% is considered acceptable for qualitative coding, with an associated p-value less than 5% that the agreement was due to chance. Confirmability of analysis is characteristic of findings that reach congruence between 2 or more independent researchers. An inquiry audit can also support confirmability as well as dependability of analysis. A more widely used method to ensure confirmability, however, is the audit trail. This carefully documented record enables an independent auditor to follow how the researcher arrived at his or her conclusions. To further enhance auditability, the researcher should maintain a decision trail. It details the researcher's decision rules for data categorization and the inferences made in the analysis. Transferability of the findings. When findings from the data can be transferred to other settings or groups, transferability has been reached. Reporting qualitative results. A qualitative report, which is often written using the first-person voice, is interesting and engaging to read because of the informal writing style and the liberal use of quotations from informants. The report must still provide information about the topic under study, however, and most qualitative researchers reflect on the fittingness of the results as well. Fittingness refers to how well the study findings fit the data and are explicitly grounded in the lived experience under study. It also reflects the typical and atypical elements of that experience. Researchers to theoretical and literature support are often used in this context. In addition, direct quotes from the informants may support this aspect of conformability. Reading the qualitative analysis section of a report. Qualitative analysis is often more difficult and time-consuming to accomplish than quantitative analysis, but its report is usually engaging and interesting to read. It provides intuitive insights into human behavior. Using qualitative analysis in nursing practice. The results of qualitative studies can be applied in nursing practice in a variety of ways. This data provides rich insights into the experiences of patients, their families, and other caregivers. Using the results of qualitative studies in practice requires that the nurse be able to critically appraise the transferability of data. The nurse must review the descriptions of settings and the informants to determine whether they are similar enough to be confidently applied to another group of individuals. The nurse reader should focus on themes elicited in the study to determine the researcher's applicability to evidence-based practice. These themes often provide guidance in the development of counseling procedures, teaching plans, discharge preparation, and other means of helping patients manage their health. Results of case research can help nurses understand how individuals may experience threats to their health, uncommon conditions, or exacerbations of their disease states. Phenomenology facilitates an understanding of how patients experience events and situations, enabling the nurse to design better supports for them. Ethnography can assist the nurse in designing culturally sensitive care. Grounded theory, in particular, helps the nurse understand and analyze situations to predict changes in them and to influence outcomes. Regardless of the types of study, the results should be scrutinized for trustworthiness to determine which findings can be used in evidence-based practice. The analysis should be subjected to same critical review. In other words, the study should satisfy general assumptions about the evidence and withstand scrutiny of the methodological quality of the analysis. Henderson and Raoult, 2004, support the use of qualitative results in evidence-based practice, but they also recommend that a stricter standard be applied to qualitative analysis that will be used for evidence for practice. They propose the following criteria for determining whether to include qualitative results in a practice guideline. The methods of analysis should be described in detail. 2 or more researchers should independently judge the data. Triangulation of data sources, methods, or investigators should be evident. A code-recode procedure should be described. Pre-examination or external audit should be reported. In addition, these authors recommend rating qualitative research in much the same way that results of experiments are rated using levels and grades. Based on the 4 elements of trustworthiness: credibility, dependability, conformability, and transferability, levels of qualitative evidence can be linked to recommendations. Lehman and Sadowski of 2012 offer additional guidance for incorporating qualitative research into evidence-based practice. They suggest that qualitative inquiry has a critical role in providing solid evidence that will enhance quality care to help ensure compliance with treatment plans, explain unintended consequences, and support positive patient outcomes. Following the critical appraisal of qualitative studies, research found to be credible can be used as practice-based evidence in 6 specific areas: practice-based interventions and implementation strategies, revealing untested but promising interventions; causal mechanisms, exploration of underlying mechanisms for affecting patient outcomes; approaches to adaptation, understanding how nurses adapt strategies to diverse settings, practice settings; how to guidance, revealing the steps required to implement an intervention, including barriers and facilitators; unanticipated effects, unexpected consequences of an intervention at both patient and system levels; contextual factors, provider willingness, capacity, and need for a new intervention, creating qualitative analysis. There are few rules for qualitative analysis. However, some general guidelines can help the novice researcher conduct a trustworthy analysis that results in meaningful themes. Establish the goal of the analysis. Design of the study will provide guidance as to the overall goal of the analysis. The goal of the analysis may be to determine content, find meaning, describe a culture, or develop a theory. Beginning the analytic process with a general goal provides the analyst with direction and structure as the analysis proceeds. Organize the data. There will almost certainly be an enormous amount of data to manage, so developing an organizational system early in the qualitative analysis process helps keep the process manageable. Determine a way to identify each piece of data by source, timing, and type as it is collected and stored in a secure location. Begin analysis early. Data should be evaluated and analyzed as they are collected. This constant comparison method enables the researcher to make changes in the data collection plan while informants are still available. Read individual pieces of data in their entirety for tone. The first read-through of a data source should be undertaken purely to get a sense of tone of the overall response, not for analysis. Reread each piece of data for meaning. Subsequent readings begin to reveal meaning as the data As the data is examined, analytic memos should be written in the margins of transcripts, and relevant quotations and examples should be identified. At this stage, the analysts will begin identifying units of analysis such as words, phrases, or entire documents for later analytic coding. Develop codes. Potential categories for codes were introduced earlier in this chapter. During this phase of analysis, units of meaning are categorized into codes. Data may be coded for an infinite number of ways, but Creswell 2013 provides some structural guidance for this process. His approach includes the following steps. Select a document from the data. Reread the document to get a sense of the whole. Ask questions such as, what is this about? The concern at this point is not substance, but underlying meaning. Write thoughts in margins. These margin notes should describe the ideas about meaning that come to mind during reading. Make a list of all the ideas that have been written in the margins. Cluster together the ideas that have similarities. Organize these topics into columns such as major topics, unique topics, or leftovers. Take the list and revisit the data. Note which segments of the data represent each of these categories. Evaluate this preliminary organizing schematic to see if the codes capture most of the data segments. Review multiple pieces of data to determine whether the code categories are sufficient or whether additional categories emerge. Find the most descriptive label for each topic and turn it into a category. Write a definition for it and identify representative words in the informant's language. Group the topics that are redundant, overlapping, or reflective of similar concepts. Look for ways to reduce the total list of categories. Label the final categories of meaning and develop a codebook that outlines each code, its definition, and any criteria for placing it into the category. The result of this process leads to the development of a dictionary to guide the further analysis of the remaining data. Margin notes, reflective notes manually inserted into qualitative transcripts that describe ideas about meaning that occur to the analyst during reading. Dictionary, specified definitions of codes included in the qualitative analysis codebook. Once all the data has been coded, the analyst scrutinizes the data for overall themes. These themes are identified and reported with supporting quotations from informants. Qualitative analysis is complete when no new codes or themes emerge from data analysis. Summary of key concepts. The sheer volume that is characteristic of qualitative inquiry creates challenges related to both managing data and drawing sensible conclusions. The goal is to reduce the data to meaningful units that can be described, interpreted, and reported in an understandable way. Qualitative analysis is challenging because no standard rules exist for interpreting the data that is generated, and concise conclusions must be drawn while retaining the rich description that is a qualitative characteristic. Although not standard, some steps apply to most qualitative analysis. Prepare the data for analysis. Conduct the analysis by developing an in-depth understanding of the data. Represent the data in reduced form. Interpret the larger meaning of the data. As data was collected, they are reviewed and re-reviewed, and analytic memos are written. Using this kind of constant comparison process allows the analysis to guide subsequent data collection by amending or adding interview questions or change in observational methods. The three general styles of qualitative analysis are the template analysis style, the editing analysis style, and the immersion crystallization style. To make sense of the narrative data, a method of managing and organizing the data, a method of managing and organizing the information must be established early in the research process. After gaining a general impression from a first read through of the data, the researcher develops a classification system. Upon the conclusion of an intense examination of the data and the development of an overall classification schematic, the researcher develops more specific categories of meaning called codes. Units of analysis, such as a phrase, word, or document, are categorized into specific codes that reflect overall meaning. The coding process is used both to generate descriptions and to begin interpretations of themes and patterns in the data. The most widely used qualitative analysis procedure is simple content analysis. This method may be adapted to the specific tradition, such as ethnography, phenomenology, or grounded theory. The use of automated systems for coding continues to inspire controversy, but is also becoming more common. Computerized systems for coding can enhance reliability of the data, although researchers must be careful not to substitute breadth for depth of analysis. Standards have been established to determine the trustworthiness of qualitative data analysis, namely credibility, dependability, confirmability, and transferability. Qualitative results are reported as themes, supported by their descriptive codes and verbatim reports from informants. Quotes should be used that represent patterns, not individual anecdotes. That concludes our lecture for NUR 410, Week 9. Thank you very much.